What is the creepiest glitch you've experienced in real life? Sometimes when I dream and I wake up. I know it's a dream. I just know it's a dream. But I can't wake up. And the harder I try to wake up, or the more I realize I have to wake up, the scarier it gets, even though nothing really changes. It feels like a darkness enveloping you as you try and wake up from your fake room. How do I know it's a fake room? Just some weird details. Like how my wall looks a little too white. Or the Christmas tree's lights are on when they're supposed to be off. Don't ask why I have one in my room and not the living room lol. So then I go through like maybe 1 to 2 minutes of intense waking up, falling back asleep, trying to open my eyes, but then falling back asleep right after. As I said, the rooms are similar, but not too similar. So I can just about tell when I'm in the real world and when I'm dreaming. Or perhaps both rooms are fake, and when I finally wake up, it's the real me in the real world. I dunno. Those are the scariest of dreams, even though they last for a few minutes tops, because that's right before I'm about to wake up. Sometimes, a moment or two before something happens, I'll remember I dreamed what was about to happen. Then it happens. This whole thing happens so fast, it's freaky. Was taking the train home one afternoon and an old man was sitting a row ahead of me. He turned around and asked for directions to the hospital, and I told him which stop to get off at. Eventually, his stop arrives, and he gets up to leave, but before he exits he turned and said thank you, I'll see you later. I said yeah no problem, and again he said I'll see you later, and he looked me right in the eye. I said sure, see ya, and he got off the train and hobbled away with his cane. Thought it was a little weird he was adamant about seeing me around, but whatever. Freaky thing is, when I got off the train and to the bus station, about 5 minutes after boarding my bus I hear a voice that sounds like the old man. I looked out the bus window and sure enough, he was there at the bus station, same clothes, hat, and cane. I know it was the same guy, but with his walking speed and the available bus/train routes at the time I have zero clue how he got to the bus station right when I did. There are no buses near the hospital that go to that bus station, and my train was the only train that had just arrived at the bus station. Every time I just randomly think about the movie Groundhog Day, I see it everywhere. People mention it to me. It's on the TV, radio. I can't escape it. In 2010 I was working for a transportation company as a dispatcher, and I walked out to go home one afternoon and my foot went through the paved parking lot. After I took another step I looked all over and it was all solid. It was a weird random thing, but I'll never forget it. When my mom called to tell me that my grandpa died, I thought she said Papa died, and Papa is the nickname for my dad. I was crying uncontrollably, and when I finally figured out it was Grandpa I was too embarrassed to admit that I thought it was my dad. I called him later and told him, and he just laughed. Anyway, fast forward 3 weeks and my dad dies too. Part of me thinks mishearing her was the universe preparing me to lose him. It was weird, because it was like I lost him twice, and I'm still kind of waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake, and it was actually someone else. Edit. I feel kind of bad, because I've barely thought about Grandpa since my dad died. My grandma has it the worst, because she lost a husband and a son in the same month. Had a bonfire at a family member's home. They put a sheet of metal on a concrete slab, then built a bonfire on top. No one thought about what happens when you make a hot spot in the middle of a frozen concrete slab. The concrete expands with nowhere to go, so it literally explodes. I was the closest to the fire. When it exploded, I had enough time to check where the debris was going to see that I wasn't going to be hit. Look over at my mother and think I should move anyway so she doesn't freak out. So then I calmly stood up and backed away from the fire while laying down the chair I was sitting in so it would fit between my legs while I stepped backwards. At least that's what I thought. My cousin came up to me after and said he'd never seen anyone move as fast as I did. I had a dream an old friend, who I hadn't spoken to or seen around or anything in about 2 years, died, and I went to his funeral. I woke up and thought, whoa, that's weird, and went to check his Facebook to see what he was up to. He had gone missing a few days previous, but his body wasn't found until over a year later. Y2K was 20 years ago. What are your best Y2K stories? I was managing the ad department in a state agency and were under enormous pressure to prevent any Y2K problems. On New York Day I went to work before dawn and tested everything before the exec director arrived. Relieved that everything was working okay, we went to IHOP for a celebratory breakfast. The IHOP bill was date/timed stamped December 32, 1999. My favorite thing was cemetery headstones that were not Y2K compliant. People had headstones made before they died with the 19 pre-engraved, planning on filling in the next 2 digits when the time came. Oops, they kept living. I lived overseas and was watching the news with family and friends on the Armed Forces Network. The newscast did the countdown and then at 1 they cut the feed and it went to static. There were several gasps and then about 5 seconds later the feed came back and the newscast shouted, "Just kidding. Happy New Year." I thought it was pretty clever. Similarly, I was in Panama, and since there was such a huge US military presence up to that point, there was a Panama-based Armed Forces Network television station. I watched that station as they officially signed off for the last time at the stroke of midnight. Just a simple goodbye from the anchor and a blank screen from that point on. Kinda felt like I experienced a bit of history. My mother was one of those folks that was convinced that everything was going to implode for Y2K. She thought that it would be like a post-apocalyptic nightmare. No food at the stores, banks shut down, people rioting, the whole 9 yards. She desperately tried to convince me, my 2 brothers, and all of our families to come to her place in the country and bunker down for the duration. Of course, none of us were going for that, but we did keep in touch so that she didn't worry too much. I will never forget the phone call where she explained that she had stockpiled canned goods, bought a generator, and bought a milk cow. The cow was so that the kids would have milk, since there obviously wouldn't be any at the store after all commerce broke down. SHM. Her heart was in the right place, but really, mom, a milk cow. None of the kids were even babies that would need milk. She ended up selling the cow shortly after. Nothing happened. We still laugh about the Y2K milk cow. I worked in it at one of the Dow Industrial Company's headquarters, and I spent a high percentage of 1999 doing Y2K tests on every single computer, server, printer, fax machine, and, I'm pretty sure, coffee maker. No problems, and no signs of problems. That year was a waste of my life. I did the same, minus the Dow Industrial part, checked and certified systems, installed some patches from vendors or in-house teams, rechecked and recertified. By December 1999 we all were really done with it all, only to need to come in on January the 1st, because some upper echelon really wanted some last checks done after the fact. As soon as I stepped into the building lobby I saw a colleague sitting on one of the benches clutching their belly and laughing hard, tears in their eyes, pointing at the big digital signage board, wishing everyone a happy new 19,100. I was working it, and our business systems had a problem. I started fixing them. Meanwhile, some of our customers started sending us threatening letters about our needing to fix our systems. The people who got the letters didn't know what to do with them, so I threw them away. Nothing happened after I filed the letters, but someone thought it was a good idea to send them. I got a job at another company that decided to replace all its systems because just fixing the Y2K bug was too boring. Replacing under Y2K pressure was crazy expensive and difficult. We installed in mid-December and started experiencing the usual kinds of problems from a rushed install. It was very painful, but what I remember is the enormous order for flashlights that had to go out on time because no one would want them after the first of the year. I don't know what people thought was going to happen. People say we fixed all the problems, but there was so much bullshit about systems that had no issues. And in the Far East, they mostly ignored the problem, stuck in some manual procedures for the 6 weeks systems were affected, and came through fine. Anyone having a problem with 2020? Some of the date logic I saw used that year to decide whether a 2-digit year began with a 19 or 20. In October, my dad finished off the spam he purchased for Y2K. He bought 12 cases of it because it was super cheap leading up to Y2K and he just really enjoys spam. I'm honestly impressed at the dedication of someone to eat 288 cans of spam over 20 years. My dad was a systems analyst, working for what was then a major UK high street retailer based in Liverpool, who had their own in-house EPIS system that my dad worked on. His department learned of the Y2K issue at a conference in 94 or 95 and had the system 90% compliant by 1998, but the management were very cautious. Everything was tested and retested and dad was on call throughout December 99 with incredibly generous rates. The office was at the Albert Dock and dad was called in New Year's Eve as a precaution, so we got to watch the fireworks over the Mersey from the top floor where dad's office was. Dad reckons the extra pay, after tax, amounted to about 6 weeks' pay. I'm from the rural Midwest. Looking back at my childhood, you would think I grew up in the 1970s and not the 90s because of how country my hometown was. My family didn't really understand Y2K, but they bought into the hype. A lot of religious people were twisting the whole thing into an apocalyptic type of thing. I was a kid, and it scared me. I dreaded New Year's Eve because I was worried that was when the world would end. A few days prior, a low-flying aircraft of some kind flew over the family farm. It was so loud and must have been going fast because there was a sound that may have been a sonic boom. I was outside with my grandpa and I ran inside at the sound, hid under the kitchen table and started bawling. My grandpa fished me out from the table and I told him why I was so scared. He and I rang in the New Year's together that year so he could show me that everything would be fine. Wow, you made it to the end. Nice job. Like and subscribe to see more edit videos. Have a nice day.